Hey everyone, it's Types, and I am still sick. So, yeah, hopefully, I'm doing a little better than I was in previous days, so hopefully my voice is sounding all good. But if it's not, I'm sorry about that. But let's just hop straight into this video, and I'm going to be talking about the Lost Zone mechanic in the current standard format, and if it is well designed or not. So this is essentially exclusively cards from the set Lost Origin. It's based around the cards with the Lost Zone, some within context, some without context. If you haven't seen my rating system, I'm using this essentially the same rating system I used for cards, 4 separate categories each out of 10, total score out of 40. And then I also do a star rating. I pull my community, and their average rating here was a 3.03, so like 30 out of 40. Which is fair, right? We see a lot of people saying 3, most people saying 3 here. Yeah, so this is, people think it's pretty good, right? I don't think it's like the best thing ever, though. And yeah, we'll get to the reasons why it's good and also the reasons why it's bad. First of all, there are a solid chunk of cards in the Lost Zone. As I said, this is only the standard ones. I believe the Lost Zone has shown up in the TCG around 3 times. Beginning with Color Legends, and then we saw it in, and Color Legends is before expanded, just a little bit, but before expanded, which I believe was the first time. If that was not the first time we saw it, please correct me. I might do a video covering the older Lost Zone cards. If you're interested in that, please let me know. I'm not as experienced in them, but I gladly cover them. But then we later saw it in the set Lost Thunder, in the later half of the Sun and Moon era, which was kind of cool. And we saw some cards after that set as well, for that like era of cards. And then most recently we saw in the set Lost Origin from the near the end of the Sword and Shield era, and then a few cards during the Lost Zone after that. So we see a wide variety of cards. And if you don't know what some of these cards do, it's fine. I'm not going to read them all out because, like what they all do, because let's be honest, it doesn't matter too much. We see a wide variety. We have like 20 or 30 or something. Like 20-something Lost Zone cards here. And there's obviously a wide variety of types, and we notice that most of them are from the Lost Origin set. The only ones that are not, there's actually a Rotom V that was not from Lost Origin. And I'm talking about their primary art. Rotom V and Rotom V Star, which did not come out together, and in fact are not meant to be paired together. But they both came out in not the Lost Origin set. Then we also see that there was an Absol that came out at a different time, and I think that was it. And also, we know something like Aerodactyl V-Star. The Aerodactyl V is not a Lost Zone card. Also, the Shuppet is not a Lost Zone card. And the Binacle. The Binacle, the Nuzleaf, the Seedot, the Slugma, those are not Lost Zone cards, although they have evolutions that are Lost Zone cards. And the way that cards interact with the Lost Zone, there's 2 main ways. I guess I should say what the Lost Zone is in case you don't know. Pretty much it's a mechanic where the idea is that it's like the disco pile, except you can't ever get cards back. So the main way that this is used is that it's like used to punish certain actions, have a like steeper cost. So, for example, a Shift Tree goes into the Lost Zone after attacks. You can't ever get it back. Magcargo sends its energy to the Lost Zone. And then we see a few other things, or I guess really one other main way of the Lost Zone being used, where we see that Cramorant has its attack cost being free if you have 4 or more cards in the Lost Zone. So you can get benefit out of having cards in the Lost Zone. But of course, that means you have to put cards in the Lost Zone some way. So let's just talk about the different ways, I guess, packages and uses that you will see of the Lost Zone. So we see the Lost Zone package. This is what, when you think of Lost Zone, probably what you think of. The Lost Zone based deck, based around Comfrey and Colorless Experiment, as well as possibly Lost Vacuum, and even more possibly, I guess, Giratina V-Star, to put cards in the Lost Zone. These are essentially the only way to put cards in the Lost Zone that are used. I guess there's also Bayonet, but people don't really use it too much. Or at least in the Lost Zone deck, they don't use it too much. But Comfrey Colorless Experiment, I actually did an in-depth video on Colorless Experiment, so go check that out if you haven't, about the design analysis. But well then, Comfrey put cards in the Lost Zone and allow you to draw cards. Lost Vacuum is a disruption card, or just putting cards in the Lost Zone. It could do either one. And then we also, although we'll always put a card of yours in the Lost Zone. And then we also see that Giratina V-Star's attack puts cards in the Lost Zone. And it sees play for its attack. That being said, it's kind of hard to power up. So then the cards we see in terms of payoff, we see Fantina, Mirage Gate, Cramorant Sableye, and then also Giratina as payoff from the Lost Zone. So you see that Cramorant attacks for free if it has 4 cards. If you have 4 cards in the Lost Zone, Sableye is able to do a massive loss to my attack. If you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, which puts 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like for only 1 psychic energy, very devastating. Fantina, allowing your Pokemon to take massive amounts less damage from Pokemon Vs. If you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone. And then Mirage Gate, or I guess Giratina V-Star here. Its V-Star power will just instantly KO something. If you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, in Mirage Gate here, allowing you to search for up to 2 basic energy cards of different types and attach them to your Pokemon any way you like. If you have 7 or more cards in the Lost Zone. So that's a pretty big deal. That's very powerful. We'll get to most of these cards later as well. But then we see separate cards, or I guess cards that see play in separate decks. Although I suppose Delphox V does see play in the Lost Zone deck, but I don't know, that doesn't happen too much. I kind of forget about that as well, and that's not necessarily its main use either, but stuff like Aerodactyl V-Star, just a powerful attacker. Giratina V-Star, powerful attacker, and they're often paired with like Arceus. Giratina, as I said, can be paired with the Lost Zone-based package, but often paired with Arceus. Porygon 2 doesn't see too much play, but I guess I could be put in the Lost Zone deck, but like you wouldn't really do that. It's mainly Attack and Rotom V-Star, or V and V-Star. Rotom V and V-Star is its own separate deck that also has interaction with the Lost Zone by putting it 2 cards in the Lost Zone with its attack. And then we also see Baynet, allowing you to recover a supported card, which sends itself into the Lost Zone on use. Then we also see Lost City as a disruption. Oh, it's a stadium, which I made a tier list of stadiums. I put this one decently high. It's a pretty generic stadium, but then if a Pokemon's KO'd, it goes to the Lost Zone, meaning if your opponent only has 1 threat tech card for the matchup, then you can Lost Zone it and they can't get it back. This is mainly used in, well, it's used in a few decks, but commonly used in Mew VMAX to counter Drapion V. We also see Lost Vacuum to counter various, it gets rid of stadiums and tools, and also Lost Zone is a card from your hand. So that was also mentioned in the Lost Zone deck, but it's more commonly played in non-Lost Zone decks, including Mew VMAX again, as a bump to Path to the Peak. So Lost Vacuum is like a very, very powerful card. Well, it's okay. It's like Field Blower, but like a worse version of that, essentially. But it's still a solid card. And then Delphox V as an attacker. It does 120 to the active and 120 to one of their bench. And then you lost 2 energy from it. And also its first attack's not the worst thing in the world either. And that's mostly really powerful because of the fact that you can go ahead and use this with fire-based toolbox decks, and the spread damage it does a lot of damage. It's very scary to deal with. You can play in Lost Zone decks as well to replace, if you remember, Raikou Amazing Rare, which I don't remember if I'm going to talk about much during this video, but it's a replacement for that in the current standard format, although it's not really much for a Lost Zone based card. Really most of these, and then I should say Giratina is a very powerful attacker, and Aerodactyl V-Star is also a powerful attacker. In its Ancient Star attack gives it an ability. It's a very strange attack, but it's good. As a counter to, most specifically, Lugia and Archeops. But yeah, these are all, I could go into depth about any of these. These are all unique cards. And I imagine you've probably played some of these. You probably haven't played all of these, but they're kind of cool. And then lastly, the forgotten cards. I hope I haven't actually forgotten anything completely from this list, because that would be kind of embarrassing. But yeah, we see Shiftry, which does 210 for 1 energy on a stage 2, but then it sends itself to the Lost Zone. That's okay. Magcargo, 220 for 3, and then put all energy attached into the Lost Zone. Rotom V, this promo, which I haven't even read before. Oh, it can Lost Zone a special energy attached to the defending Pokemon, or do 160 for 3. I mean, it's just not very impressive, right? I need to talk about the other Rotom V. I'll get to that in a second as well. I should have included it. Well, I included it where I should have, but Barbarical here. It's pretty interesting. If your opponent takes a prize, obviously, if you take a prize card, it usually goes to your hand, but your opponent's prize cards now go to the Lost Zone instead of their hand. That's kind of fun. Stone's I mean, it mills the top card of the deck into the Lost Zone. That's something. Its attack's pretty bad, though. All these are pretty bad, to be honest. Absol, put a random card from your opponent's hand into the Lost Zone with this attack, as well as damage. Most of these do damage. And then Bouffalant here, puts an energy attached to the defending Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Out of all these, I'd say that might be the most playable, although they're not awful. To be honest, for the fact that these are the worst, they are not bad by any means, except for Rotom V. Rotom V is pretty bad here, but I don't even know why this card exists. But really, most of these cards are they're completely passable cards. They're not good cards. They're kind of bad, but for the fact, as I said, that they're bad cards. Like when you look at other mechanics, these are like the better versions of. These are like much better than bad cards of other mechanics, which I'll probably be covering some other mechanics in future videos. Also, sorry, this video is going to go on for a while, isn't it? But yeah, they're pretty solid. And then Rotom V here, I forgot to talk about this one, although it can be used for its attack, and it was mostly used for that. Now it actually is used in control-based decks or slower decks to draw cards. It sends you with various cards in like Miraidon EX and Stormy Mountains, I suppose. But it's a good card to draw. You draw through your turn ends. Now moving on to I showed the score, but interesting in the vacuum. It's 10 out of 10 for this, right? I guess I'm just rushing into this because it's a really cool, and I'm not talking about all the cards for each segment, but interesting in a vacuum because it has all these different options. You can go ahead and do like this interesting pattern where you have 4 Hunts of the Lost Zones, your first goal for Kermit, your second goal is Mirage Gate for 7, third goal Sableye for 10. And then, of course, they're putting cards in the Lost Zone with Comfy and Caustic Experiment. This is really interesting because you have like a really fun flow to the deck. And this is just the base Lost Zone deck. And Kermit attacking for free is kind of fun. Attacking for free is always fun. Sableye placing damage cards is always fun. And the Mirage Gate allowing you to power up anything seems really cool. And then also Comfy and Close Experiment have interesting decision making. I believe I talked about this in the Close Experiment analysis video, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And then I also have Bayonet included on the slide because it allows you to recover supporter. Kind of a cool mechanic. Also, yeah, it is kind of cool. If you played with Versus Seeker, you'll know how fun this is and how powerful it is as well. But it's certainly really cool, especially with Mirage Gate. I think Mirage Gate's definitively the coolest part of the Lost Zone package, even if it's not played in every Lost Zone deck, because it has so much versatility, which we'll take a look at now in the next part, which will be interesting within context. So yeah, and this is, I suppose it's a 10 out of 10, right? Because Mirage Gate can pair up so many things. I've only included a small number in the cards, I guess some of the main ones, but they can pair Mirage Gate with, we see Rayquaza Amazing Rare, and I foreshadowed Raikou Amazing Rare. You could power up Kyogre Amazing Rare as well, I suppose, or any of them, but Rayquaza is definitely, like, the Rayquaza and the Raikou are definitely the best ones. Which they have since rotated, but they're still very fun to play with. The Dragonite V here, very powerful because it can go ahead and it does 250 damage. You can power it up relatively easily, as well as Radiant Greninja, Hisuian Goodra, V-Star, some very powerful attackers. Radiant Greninja is also a support-based Pokemon. But, yeah, Radiant Greninja sees played in almost every Lost Box deck. The other ones see play here and there. Not uncommon cards, but not in every deck either. You have so many options, and then we also see put Aerodactyl V-Star here as a counter to Lugia V-Star, and I also put Lost City and Lost Vacuum as counters to Path to the Peak, so they do have interaction with other decks as well. And then, as I said before, a lot of the other cards are super fun. Really, every deck, every Lost Zone-based deck's really fun. The Rotom deck's fun. Not my personal favorite deck, but it's cool. And the Lost Zone really has something for everyone. I don't know anyone who dislikes every different Lost Zone deck. There's so many of them. Yet they share similarities, and I think they're all really cool. Now, moving on to what's the weakest category of this. I wasn't sure exactly where to put this, but for anyone who said they don't like the Lost Zone, this is probably the reason they said they didn't like it. Sableye is very oppressive. Lost Mind putting 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like is super disruptive to single prizes. I've shown various single prizes that are all good, some of which have rotated or don't really have much use now, but there are a number that have 60 HP, and then you KO 2 of them for 1 energy on a single prize basic. That's super scary and super unfun, because now your engine's like completely messed up. You can do the same thing with the Mirage Gate plus Radiant Greninja as well, carrying Pokemon leveled up to 90 HP, which would include most of the evolutions to all these Pokemon except for Coughing. So it'll KO Curlias, it'll KO pretty much any evolving basic or any evolving stage 1 will die, which is unfortunate because now your whole engine isn't working anymore. And especially with EXs evolving from single prizes, it's super disruptive and super unfun to play against. Of course, a lot of the time, Sableye is like a mid to late game attacker, and then these Pokemon are early game Pokemon, so it won't be the biggest issue all the time, but The more the format's developed, the more clear it is that Sableye is super disruptive and super powerful. And honestly, I think Lost Zone's like the best deck in format. Some people would say it's other decks. I think it's definitely Lost Zone. Mirage Gate's super powerful as well. So Sableye is like very scary. Mirage Gate's kind of annoying. Some like Guillotine or Goodra are kind of annoying to deal with as well, and Aerodactyl. But really also cards like Lost Zone, Lost City, and Lost Vacuum are annoying to deal with. That being said, there's some interesting counterplay to a lot of them, but unfortunately, you can't interact with your opponent's Lost Zone, and to me, that's the biggest missed feature. Lost Zone. I think it'd be really cool if both players' Lost Zones interacted in some way. They do not at all. So, like, it'd be cool if you could put a Sableye in not a Lost Zone deck. If your opponent's running Lost Zone, you can, if they have 10 cards in the collectively shared Lost Zone, then you can both attack with Sableye, but that's not how it works. So, yeah, it makes Lost Zone a little bit less fun, and it's very oppressive as well, in the way it targets down single prize basics, which is very unfun. So it's going to end up with a 4 out of 10. I know I really ragged on it. It's still kind of, it's like a cool deck. And honestly, just watching an opponent play Lost Zone, you get some really cool ideas and cool sequences. Unlike a deck like MUV Max, where they're pretty much doing the same thing every time, the Lost Zone player is like mixing things up all the time, and it's really fun to watch, to be honest. Even if you are like eating massive amounts of damage, it's not great, but I think Lost Zone's like not the worst deck to play against by any means. I imagine some people would rate this lower, but I think it's okay. It's definitely passable. And then lastly is at Balanced. As I said, it is the best deck in the game, but it is not like so brokenly overpowered or anything. In fact, the Lost Zone quote deck or mechanic is very comparable to decks like to the main deck of any set. So when you look at expansions, for example, Brilliant Star, I'll just go through the other ones of that year. Brilliant Stars, you had Arceus V-Star, undisputedly best deck in format. Then Astral Radiance, we had Palkia V-Star, pretty much also undisputedly best deck in format. And then we saw Silver Tempest with Lugia V-Star, pretty much undisputedly the best deck in format. Very, very strong, I'd argue, very overpowered. Debatably some that had to do with the context that they're in, but I think Lost Zone is not as strong as those when they were at their peak. So I'm gonna have to say that Lost Zone is reasonably balanced at 6 out of 10. That's not the most balanced. It's still overpowered. Also, one thing though I do like about the mechanic, not looking at it as a card, but as a mechanic, we see that the weaker Lost Zone cards, as I said, are still okay. They're passably viable, which I think really helps add to the score because the fact that Pokemon releases so many like generic cards, but luckily the Lost Zone mechanic was able to avoid most of those generic cards. Even the more generic and weaker ones are still kind of cool and have some value, which I really like. And so when we look at those like other ones like Absol, Sojourner, Barbarical, Shifty, Macargo, stuff like that, Rotom V, did I forget something? I definitely forgot one, Bufalon, I think. They're generic, but they have some value and they carry some weight. So I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. And also Inteleon VMAX we've seen as a card that's rising up to counter the Lost Zone deck. I suppose not just Inteleon VMAX, but also various other spread aspects. Because despite Sableye being a spread-based deck, or Sableye, Lost Zone, Toolbox, whatever, being a spread-based deck, it is actually very vulnerable itself to spread, especially with the placement of damage counters. I didn't talk about this really, but Manaphy's a card in the format, which has the ability, well, I'll just call it Bench Barrier. I believe it's called Aqua Veil, but turns off bench damage as like a counter to stuff like Great Ninja and Vapstick Urshifu VMAX and all other sorts of bench damaging attackers. So Inteleon VMAX can hit through that, can really disrupt Lost Zone player's board state. It is not something that a Lost Zone player will want to face. So it keeps in check a little bit, and also in my opinion, it's a really cool deck. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, meaning its grand total is 30 out of 40. So this is the same as you guys rated it. Oh, also if you want to... No, I forgot to update the thing again. It's better than pretty mediocre. It's pretty good. It's not the best, though. There's much room for improvement, notably because it's not as fun to play against. But... yeah, I don't know how I always forget to update one slide. But yeah, anyway, so star rating of 3, or 30 out of 40 essentially. So we're on pretty much the same page here. And if you want to participate in these polls, check out my community tab. I have various polls. I will have more going up. We'll see how it goes. But Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. As I said, I'm a little sick, so sorry for any mistakes I made, but I really appreciate any feedback you have. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video. See ya.